Chapter 10. A quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, passed away, and Fanny was still thinking of Edmund, Miss Crawford, and herself, without interruption from anyone. She began to be surprised at being left so long, and to listen with an anxious desire of hearing their steps and their voices again. She listened, and at length she heard voices and feet approaching her, but she had just satisfied herself that it was not those she wanted when Miss Bertram, Mr. Rushworth, and Mr. Crawford issued from the same path which she had trod herself, and were before her. Miss Price, all alone, and my dear Fanny, how comes this? Were the first salutations. She told her story. Poor dear Fanny, cried her cousin, how ill you have been used by them. You had better have stayed with us. Then, seating herself with the gentlemen on each side, she resumed the conversation which had engaged them before, and discussed the possibility of improvements with much animation. Nothing was fixed on, but Henry Crawford was full of ideas and projects, and, generally speaking, whatever he proposed was immediately approved, first by her and then by Mr. Rushworth, whose principal business seemed to be to hear the others, and who scarcely risked an original thought of his own beyond a wish that they had seen his friend Smith's place. After some minutes spent in this way, Miss Bertram, observing the iron gate, expressed a wish of passing through it into the park, that their views and their plans might be more comprehensive. It was the very thing of all others to be wished. It was the best. It was the only way of proceeding with any advantage, in Henry Crawford's opinion, and he directly saw a knoll not half a mile off, which would give them exactly the requisite command of the house. Go therefore they must to that knoll, and through that gate. But the gate was locked. Mr. Rushworth wished he had brought the key. He had been very near thinking whether he should not bring the key. He was determined he would never come without the key again. But still, this did not remove the present evil. They could not get through, and as Miss Bertram's inclination for so doing did by no means lessen, it ended in Mr. Rushworth declaring outright that he would go and fetch the key. He set off accordingly. It is undoubtedly the best thing we can do now, as we are so far from the house already, said Mr. Crawford, when he was gone. Yes, there is nothing else to be done. But now, sincerely, do not you find the place altogether worse than you expected? No, indeed, far otherwise. I find it better, grander, more complete in its style, though that style may not be the best. And to tell you the truth, speaking rather lower, I do not think that I shall ever see Southerton again with so much pleasure as I do now. Another summer will hardly improve it to me. After a moment's embarrassment, the lady replied, You are too much a man of the world not to see it with the eyes of the world. If other people think Southerton improved, I have no doubt that you will. I'm afraid I'm not quite so much the man of the world as might be good for me in some points. My feelings are not quite so evanescent, nor my memory of the past under such easy dominion as one finds to be the case with men of the world. This was followed by a short silence. Miss Bertram began again. You seem to enjoy your drive here very much this morning. I was glad to see you so well entertained. You and Julia were laughing the whole way. Were we? Yes, I believe we were, but I have not the least recollection at what. Oh, I believe I was relating to her some ridiculous stories of an old Irish groom of my uncle's. Your sister loves to laugh. You think her more light-hearted than I am? More easily amused, he replied. Consequently, you know, smiling, better company. I could not have hoped to entertain you with Irish anecdotes during a 10-mile drive. Naturally, I believe I'm as lively as Julia, but I have more to think of now. You have, undoubtedly, and there are situations in which very high spirits would denote insensibility. Your prospects, however, are too fair to justify want of spirits. You have a very smiling scene before you. Do you mean literally or figuratively? Literally, I conclude. Yes, certainly the sun shines and the park looks very cheerful, but unluckily that iron gate, that aha, gave me a feeling of a restraint and hardship. I cannot get out, as the starling said. As she spoke, and it was with expression, she walked to the gate. He followed her. Mr. Rushworth is so long fetching this key. And for the world you would not get out without the key and without Mr. Rushworth's authority and protection, or I think you might with little difficulty pass round the edge of the gate here with my assistance. I think it might be done if you really wish to be more at large, and could allow yourself to think it not prohibited. Prohibited? Nonsense. I certainly can get out that way, and I will. Mr. Rushworth will be here in a moment, you know. We shall not be out of sight. Or if we are, Miss Price will be so good as to tell him that he will find us near that knoll, the grove of oak on the knoll. Fanny, feeling all this to be wrong, could not help making an effort to prevent it. You will hurt yourself, Miss Bertram, she cried. You will certainly hurt yourself against those spikes. You will tear your gown. You will be in danger of slipping into the ha-ha. You had better not go. Her cousin was safe on the other side while these words were spoken, and smiling with all the good humor of success, she said, Thank you, my dear Fanny, but I and my gown are alive and well. So good-bye. Fanny was again left to her solitude, and with no increase of pleasant feelings, for she was sorry for almost all that she had seen and heard, astonished at Miss Bertram and angry with Mr. Crawford, by taking a circuitous route, and as it appeared to her very unreasonable direction of the knoll, they were soon beyond her eye, and for some minutes longer she remained without sight or sound of any companion. She seemed to have the little wood all to herself. She could almost have thought that Edmund and Miss Crawford had left it, but that it was impossible for Edmund to forget her so entirely. She was again roused from disagreeable musings by sudden footsteps. Somebody was coming at a quick pace down the principal walk. She expected Mr. Rushworth, but it was Julia, who, hot and out of breath, and with a look of disappointment, cried out on seeing her, Heyday, where are the others? I thought Maria and Mr. Crawford were with you. Fanny explained. A pretty trick, upon my word. I cannot see them anywhere, looking eagerly into the park. But they cannot be very far off, and I think I am equal to as much as Maria, even without help. But, Julia, Mr. Rushworth will be here in a moment with a key. Do wait for Mr. Rushworth. Not I. Indeed, I've had enough of the family for one morning. My child, I have but this moment escaped from his horrible mother. Such a penance as I have been enduring, while you were sitting here so composed and so happy. It might have been as well, perhaps, if you had been in my place, but you always contrive to keep out of these scrapes. This was a most unjust reflection, but Fanny could allow for it and let it pass. Julia was vexed, and her temper was hasty, but she felt that it would not last, and therefore, taking no notice, only asked her if she had not seen Mr. Rushworth. Yes, we saw him. He was posting away as if upon life and death, and could just spare time to tell us his errand, and where you all were. It is a pity he should have so much trouble for nothing. That is Miss Maria's concern. I am not obliged to punish myself for her sins. The mother I could not avoid as long as my tiresome aunt was dancing about with the housekeeper, but the son I can get away from. And she immediately scrambled across the fence and walked away, not attending to Fanny's last question of whether she had seen anything of Miss Crawford and Edmund. The sort of dread in which Fanny now sat of seeing Mr. Rushworth prevented her thinking so much of their continued absence, however, as she might have done. She felt it had been very ill used, and was quite unhappy in having to communicate what had passed. He joined her within 5 minutes after Julia's exit, and though she made the best of the story, he was evidently mortified and displeased in no common degree. At first he scarcely said anything. His looks only expressed his extreme surprise and vexation, and he walked to the gate and stood there, without seeming to know what to do. They desired me to say, my cousin Maria charged me to say that you would find them at that knoll or thereabouts. I do not believe I shall go any farther, said he sullenly. I see nothing of them. By the time I get to the knoll, they may be gone somewhere else. I've had walking enough. And he sat down with a most gloomy countenance by Fanny. I'm very sorry, said she. It is very unlucky. And she longed to be able to say something more to the purpose. After an interval of silence, I think they might as well have stayed for me, said he. Miss Bertram thought you would follow her. I should not have had to follow her if she had stayed. This could not be denied, and Fanny was silenced. After another pause, he went on. Pray, Miss Price, are you such a great admirer of this Mr. Crawford as some people are? For my part, I can see nothing in him. I do not think him at all handsome. Handsome? Nobody can call such an undersized man handsome. He's not 5'9". I should not wonder if he's not more than 5'8". I think he's an ill-looking fellow. In my opinion, these Crawfords are no addition at all. We did very well without them. A small sigh escaped Fanny here, and she did not know how to contradict him. If I had made any difficulty about fetching the key, there might have been some excuse, but I went the very moment she said she wanted it. Nothing could be more obliging than your manner, I'm sure, and I dare say you walked as fast as you could, but still it is some distance, you know, from this spot to the house, quite into the house, and when people are waiting, they are bad judges of time, and every half-minute seems like 5. He got up and walked to the gate again, and wished he had had the key about him at the time. Fanny thought she discerned in his standing there an indication of relenting, which encouraged her to another attempt, and she said, therefore, It is a pity you should not join them. They expected to have a better view of the house from that part of the park, and will be thinking how it may be improved, and nothing of that sort, you know, could be settled without you. She found herself more successful in sending away than in retaining a companion. Mr. Rushworth was worked on. Well, said he, if you really think I had better go, it would be foolish to bring the key for nothing. And letting himself out, he walked off without farther ceremony. Fanny's thoughts were now all engrossed by the two who had left her so long ago, and getting quite impatient, she resolved to go in search of them. She followed their steps along the bottom walk, and had just turned up into another when the voice and the laugh of Miss Crawford once more caught her ear. The sound approached, and a few more windings brought them before her. They were just returned into the wilderness from the park, to which a side gate, not fastened, had tempted them very soon after their leaving her, and they had been across a portion of the park into a very avenue which Fanny had been hoping the whole morning to reach at last, and had been sitting down under one of the trees. This was their history. It was evident that they had been spending their time pleasantly, and were not aware of the length of their absence. Fanny's best consolation was in being assured that Edmund had wished for her very much, and that he should certainly have come back for her had she not been tired already. But this was not quite sufficient to do away with the pain of having been left a whole hour when he had talked of only a few minutes, nor to banish the sort of curiosity she felt to know what they had been conversing about all that time, and the result of the whole was to her disappointment and depression as they prepared by general agreement to return to the house. On reaching the bottom of the steps to the terrace, Mrs. Rushworth and Mrs. Norris presented themselves to the top, just ready for the wilderness at the end of an hour and a half from their leaving the house. Mrs. Norris had been too well employed to move faster. Whatever cross accidents had occurred to intercept the pleasures of her nieces, she had found a morning of complete enjoyment, for the housekeeper, after a great many curtsies on the subject of pheasants, had taken her to the dairy, told her all about their cows, and given her the receipt for a famous cream cheese, and since Julia's leaving them, they had been met by the gardener, with whom she had made a most satisfactory acquaintance, for she had set him right as to his grandson's illness, convinced him that it was an ague, and promised him a charm for it, and he, in return, had shown her all his choicest nursery plants, and actually presented her with a very curious specimen of heath. On this rencontre, they all returned to the house together, there to lounge away the time as they could with sofas and chit-chat and quarterly reviews till the return of the others and the arrival of dinner. It was late before the Miss Bertrams and the two gentlemen came in, and their ramble did not appear to have been more than partially agreeable, or at all productive of anything useful with regard to the object of the day. By their own accounts, they had all been walking after each other, and the junction which had taken place at last seemed, to Fanny's observation, to have been as much too late for re-establishing harmony as it confessedly had been for determining any alteration. She felt, as she looked at Julia and Mr. Rushworth, that hers was not the only dissatisfied bosom amongst them. There was gloom on the face of each. Mr. Crawford and Miss Bertram were much more gay, and she thought that he was taking particular pains during dinner to do away any little resentment of the other two, and restore general good humor. Dinner was soon followed by tea and coffee. A 10 miles drive home allowed no waste of hours, and from the time of their sitting down to table it was a quick succession of busy nothings till the carriage came to the door, and Mrs. Norris, having fidgeted about and obtained a few pheasant's eggs and a cream cheese from the housekeeper, and made abundance of civil speeches to Mrs. Rushworth, was ready to lead the way. At the same moment Mr. Crawford, approaching Julia, said, "I hope I am not to lose my companion, unless she is afraid of the evening air and so exposed a seat." The request had not been foreseen, but was very graciously received, and Julia's day was likely to end almost as well as it began. Miss Bertram had made up her mind to something different, and was a little disappointed, but her conviction of being really the one preferred comforted her under it, and enabled her to receive Mr. Rushworth's parting attentions as she ought. He was certainly better pleased to hand her into the barouche than to assist her in ascending the box, and his complacency seemed confirmed by the arrangement. "Well, Fanny, this has been a fine day for you, upon my word," said Mrs. Norris as they drove through the park. "Nothing but pleasure from beginning to end. I'm sure you ought to be very much obliged to your Aunt Bertram and me for contriving to let you go. A pretty good day's amusement you've had." Maria was just discontented enough to say directly, "I think you have done pretty well yourself, ma'am. Your lap seems full of good things, and here is a basket of something between us which has been knocking my elbow unmercifully." "My dear, it's only a beautiful little heath, which that nice old gardener would make me take, but if it is in your way, I will have it in my lap directly. There, Fanny, you shall carry that parcel for me. Take great care of it. Do not let it fall. It is a cream cheese, just like the excellent one we had at dinner. Nothing would satisfy that good old Mrs. Whittaker but my taking one of the cheeses. I stood out as long as I could, till the tears almost came into my eyes, and I knew that it was just the sort of that sister I would be delighted with. That Mrs. Whittaker is a treasure. She was quite shocked when I asked her whether wine was allowed at the second table, and she has turned away 2 housemaids for wearing white gowns. Take care of the cheese, Fanny. Now I can manage the other parcel in the basket very well." "What else have you been sponging?" said Maria, half pleased that Southerton should be so complimented. "Sponging, my dear! It is nothing but 4 of those beautiful pheasant's eggs, which Mrs. Whittaker would quite force upon me. She could not take a denial. She said it must be such an amusement to me, as she understood to live quite alone, to have a few living creatures of that sort, and so to be sure it will. I shall get the dairymaid to set them under the first spare hen, and if they come to good, I can have them moved to my own house and borrow a coop, and it will be a great delight to me in my lonely hours to attend to them. And if I have good luck, your mother shall have to come." It was a beautiful evening, mild and still, and the drive was as pleasant as the serenity of nature could make it. But when Mrs. Norris ceased speaking, it was altogether a silent drive to those within. Their spirits were, in general, exhausted, and to determine whether the day had afforded most pleasure or pain might occupy the meditations of almost all. Chapter 11. The day at Southerton, with all its imperfections, afforded the Miss Bertrams much more agreeable feelings than were derived from the letters from Antigua, which soon afterwards reached Mansfield. It was much pleasanter to think of Henry Crawford than of their father, and to think of their father in England again, within a certain period, which these letters obliged them to do, was a most unwelcome exercise. November was the black month fixed for his return. Sir Thomas wrote of it with as much decision as experience and anxiety could authorize. His business was so nearly concluded as to justify him in proposing to take his passage in the September packet, and he consequently looked forward with the hope of being with his beloved family again early in November. Maria was more to be pitied than Julia, for to her the father brought a husband, and the return of the friend most solicitous for her happiness would unite her to the lover on whom she had chosen that happiness should depend. It was a gloomy prospect, and all she could do was to throw a mist over it, and hope when the mist cleared away she should see something else. It would hardly be early in November. There were generally delays, a bad passage, or something, that favoring something which everybody who shuts their eyes while they look, or their understandings while they reason, feels the comfort of. It would probably be the middle of November at least. The middle of November was 3 months off. 3 months comprised 13 weeks. Much might happen in 13 weeks. Sir Thomas would have been deeply mortified by a suspicion of half that his daughters felt on the subject of his return, and would hardly have found consolation in a knowledge of the interest excited on the breast of another young lady. Miss Crawford, on walking up with her brother to spend the evening at Mansfield Park, heard the good news, and though seeming to have no concern in the affair beyond politeness, and to have vented all her feelings in a quiet congratulation, heard it with an attention not so easily satisfied. Mrs. Norris gave the particulars of the letters, and the subject was dropped. But after tea, as Miss Crawford was standing at an open window with Edmund and Fanny looking out at a twilight scene, while the Miss Bertrams, Mr. Rushworth, and Henry Crawford were all busy with candles at the pianoforte, she suddenly revived it by turning round towards the group and saying, "How happy Mr. Rushworth looks! He's thinking of November." Edmund looked round at Mr. Rushworth too, but had nothing to say. "Your father's return will be a very interesting event. It will indeed, after such an absence not only long, but including so many dangers. It will be the forerunner also of other interesting events, your sister's marriage, your taking orders." "Yes, don't be affronted," said she, laughing, "but it does put me in mind of some of the old heathen heroes, who, after performing great exploits in a foreign land, offered sacrifices to the gods on their safe return." "There is no sacrifice in the case," replied Edmund with a serious smile, and glancing at the pianoforte again. "It is entirely of her own doing." "Oh, yes, I know it is. I was merely joking. She has done no more than what every young woman would do, and I have no doubt of her being extremely happy. My other sacrifice, of course, you do not understand. My taking orders, I assure you, is quite as voluntary as Maria's marrying. It is fortunate that your inclination and your father's convenience should accord so well. There is a very good living kept for you, I understand, hereabouts." "Which you suppose has biased me?" "But that I am sure it has not," cried Fanny. "Thank you for your good word, Fanny, but it is more than I would affirm myself. On the contrary, the knowing that there was such a provision for me probably did bias me, nor can I think it wrong that it should. There was no natural disinclination to be overcome, and I see no reason why a man should make a worse clergyman for knowing that he will have a competence early in life. I was in safe hands. I hope I should not have been influenced myself in a wrong way, and I am sure my father was too conscientious to have allowed it. I have no doubt that I was biased, but I think it was blamelessly." "It is the same sort of thing," said Fanny, after a short pause. "As for the son of an admiral to go into the navy, or the son of a general to be in the army, and nobody sees anything wrong in that. Nobody wonders that they should prefer the line where their friends can serve them best, or suspects them to be less in earnest in it than they appear. No, my dear Miss Price, and for good reasons. The profession, either navy or army, is its own justification. It has everything in its favor: heroism, danger, bustle, fashion. Soldiers and sailors are always acceptable in society. Nobody can wonder that men are soldiers and sailors. But the motives of a man who takes orders with a certainty of preferment may be fairly suspected, you think?" said Edmund. "To be justified in your eyes, he must do it in the most complete uncertainty of any provision." "What? Take orders without a living? No, that is madness indeed, absolute madness. Shall I ask you how the church is to be filled, if a man is neither to take orders with living or without? No, for you certainly would not know what to say, but I must beg some advantage of the clergyman from your own argument, as he cannot be influenced by those feelings which you rank highly as temptation and reward to the soldier and sailor in their choice of profession, as heroism and Noise and fashion are all against him. He ought to be less liable to the suspicion of wanting sincerity or good intentions in the choice of his. Oh, no doubt he is very sincere in preferring an income ready-made to the trouble of working for one, and has the best intentions of doing nothing all the rest of his days but eat, drink, and grow fat. It is indolence, Mr. Bertram, indeed. Indolence and love of ease, a want of all laudable ambition, of taste for good company, or of inclination to take the trouble of being agreeable, which make men clergymen. A clergyman has nothing to do but be slovenly and selfish, read the newspaper, watch the weather, and quarrel with his wife. His curate does all the work, and the business of his own life is to dine. There are such clergymen, no doubt, but I think they are not so common as to justify Miss Crawford in esteeming it in their general character. I suspect that in this comprehensive and, may I say, commonplace censure, you are not judging from yourself, but from prejudiced persons, whose opinions you have been in the habit of hearing. It is impossible that your own observation can have given you much knowledge of the clergy. You can have been personally acquainted with very few of a set of men you condemn so conclusively. You are speaking of what you have been told at your uncle's table. I speak what appears to me to be the general opinion, and where an opinion in general, it is usually correct. Though I have not seen much of the domestic lives of clergymen, it is seen by too many to leave any deficiency of information. Where any one body of educated men, or whatever domination, are condemned indiscriminately, there must be a deficiency of information, or, smiling, of something else. Your uncle and his brother admirals perhaps knew little of clergymen beyond the chaplains whom, good or bad, they were always wishing away. Poor William! He has met with great kindness from the chaplain of the Antwerp, was a tender apostrophe of Fanny's, very much to the purpose of her own feelings, if not of the conversation's. I have been so little addicted to take my opinions from my uncle, said Miss Crawford, that I can hardly suppose. And since you push me so hard, I must observe that I am not entirely without the means of seeing what clergymen are, being at this present time the guest of my own brother, Dr. Grant, and though Dr. Grant is most kind and obliging to me, and though he is really a gentleman, and I dare say a good scholar and clever, and often preaches good sermons, and is very respectable, I see him to be an indolent, selfish bon vivant, who must have his palate consulted in everything, who will not stir a finger for the convenience of any one, and who, moreover, if the cook makes a blunder, is out of humor with his excellent wife. To own the truth, Henry and I were partly driven out this very evening by a disappointment about a green goose, which he could not get the better of. My poor sister was forced to stay and bear it. I do not wonder at your disapprobation, upon my word. It is a great defect of temper, made worse by a very faulty habit of self-indulgence, and to see your sister suffering from it must be exceedingly painful to such feelings as yours. Fanny, it goes against us. We cannot attempt to defend Dr. Grant. No, replied Fanny, but we need not give up his profession for all that, because whatever profession Dr. Grant has chosen, he would have taken not a good temper into it, and as he must, either in the navy or army, have had a great many more people under his command than he has now, I think more would have been made unhappy by him as a sailor or soldier than as a clergyman. Besides, I cannot but suppose that whatever there may be to wish otherwise in Dr. Grant would have been in a greater danger of becoming worse in a more active and worldly profession, where he would have had less time and obligation, where he might have escaped that knowledge of himself, the frequency at least of that knowledge which it is impossible he should escape as he is now. A man, a sensible man like Dr. Grant, cannot be in the habit of teaching others their duty every week, cannot go to church twice every Sunday, and preach such very good sermons in so good a manner as he does, without being the better for it himself. It must make him think, and I have no doubt that he oftener endeavors to restrain himself than he would if he had been anything but a clergyman. We cannot prove to the contrary, to be sure, but I wish you a better fate, Miss Price, than to be the wife of a man whose amiableness depends upon his own sermons. For though he may preach himself into a good humor every Sunday, it will be bad enough to have him quarreling about green goose from Monday morning till Saturday night. I think the man would often quarrel with Fanny, said Edmund affectionately, must be beyond the reach of any sermons. Fanny turned farther into the window, and Miss Crawford had only time to say, in a pleasant manner, "I fancy Miss Price has been more used to deserve praise than to hear it," when, being earnestly invited by the Miss Bertrams to join in a glee, she tripped off to the instrument, leaving Edmund looking after her in an ecstasy of admiration of all her many virtues, from her obliging manners down to her light and graceful tread. "There goes good humor, I'm sure," said he presently. "There goes a temper which would never give pain. How well she walks, and how readily she falls in with the inclination of others, joining them the moment she's asked. What a pity," he added after an instant's reflection, "that she should have been in such hands." Fanny agreed to it, and had the pleasure of seeing him continue at the window with her, in spite of the expected glee, and of having his eyes soon turned like hers towards the scene without, where all that was solemn and soothing and lovely appeared in the brilliancy of an unclouded night, and the contrast to the deep shade of the woods. Fanny spoke her feelings. "Here's harmony," said she. "Here's repose. Here's what may leave all painting and all music behind, and what poetry only one can attempt to describe. Here's what may tranquilize every care and lift the heart to rapture. When I look out on such a night as this, I feel as if there could be neither wickedness nor sorrow in the world, and there certainly would be less of both if the sublimity of nature were more attended to, and people were carried more out of themselves by contemplating such a scene." "I like to hear your enthusiasm, Fanny. It is a lovely night, and they are much to be pitied who have not been taught to feel, in some degree, as you do, who have not at least been given a taste for nature in early life. They lose a great deal." "You taught me to think and feel on the subject, cousin." "I had a very apt scholar. There's Arcturus, looking very bright." "Yes, and the bear. I wish I could see Cassiopeia." "We must go out on the lawn for that. Should you be afraid?" "Not in the least. It's a great while since we have had any stargazing." "Yes, I do not know how it has happened." The glee began. "We will stay till this is finished, Fanny," said he, turning his back on the window, and as it advanced, she had the mortification of seeing him advance too, moving forward by gentle degrees towards the instrument, and when it ceased, he was close by the singers, among the most urgent in requesting to hear the glee again. Fanny sighed alone at the window till scolded away by Mrs. Norris' threats of catching cold. Chapter 12. Sir Thomas was to return in November, and his eldest son had duties to call him earlier home. The approach of September brought tidings of Mr. Bertram, first in a letter to the gamekeeper, and then in a letter to Edmund, and by the end of August he had arrived himself, to be gay, agreeable, and gallant again as occasion served, or Miss Crawford demanded, to tell of races and Weymouth and parties and friends, to which she might have listened 6 weeks before with some interest, and altogether to give her the fullest conviction, by the power of actual comparison, of her preferring his younger brother. It was very vexatious, and she was heartily sorry for it, but so it was. And so far from now meaning to marry the elder, she did not even want to attract him beyond what the simplest claims of conscious beauty required. His lengthened absence from Mansfield without anything but pleasure in view, and his own will to consult, made it perfectly clear that he did not care about her, and his indifference was so much more than equaled by her own, that were he now to step forth the owner of Mansfield Park, the Sir Thomas complete, which he was to be in time, she did not believe she could accept him. The season and duties which brought Mr. Bertram back to Mansfield took Mr. Crawford into Norfolk. Everingham could not do without him in the beginning of September. He went for a fortnight. A fortnight of such dullness to the Miss Bertrams as ought to have put them both on their guard, and made even Julia admit, in her jealousy of her sister, the absolute necessity of distrusting his attentions, and wishing him not to return, and a fortnight of sufficient leisure, in the intervals of shooting and sleeping, to have convinced the gentleman that he ought to keep longer away, had he been more in the habit of examining his own motives, and of reflecting to what the indulgence of his idle vanity was tending. But thoughtless and selfish from prosperity and bad example, he would not look beyond the present moment. The sisters, handsome, clever, and encouraging, were an amusement to his sated mind, and finding nothing in Norfolk to equal the social pleasures of Mansfield, he gladly returned to it at the time appointed, and was welcomed thither quite as gladly by those whom he came to trifle with further. Maria, with only Mr. Rushworth to attend to her, and doomed to the repeated details of his day's sport, good or bad, his boast of his dogs, his jealousy of his neighbors, his doubts of their qualifications, and his zeal after poachers, subjects which will not find their way to female feelings without some talent on one side or some attachment on the other, had missed Mr. Crawford grievously, and Julia, unengaged, unemployed, felt all the right of missing him much more. Each sister believed herself the favorite. Julia might be justified in so doing by the hints of Mrs. Grant, inclined to credit what she wished, and Maria by the hints of Mr. Crawford himself. Everything returned into the same channel as before his absence, his manners being to each so animated and agreeable as to lose no ground with either, and just stopping short of the consistence, the steadiness, the solicitude, and the warmth which might excite general notice. Fanny was only one of the party who found anything to dislike. But since the day at Southerton, she could never see Mr. Crawford with either sister without observation, and seldom without wonder or censure, and had her confidence in her own judgment been equal to her exercise of it in every other respect, had she been sure that she was seeing clearly and judging candidly, she would probably have made some important communications to her usual confidant. As it was, however, she only hazarded a hint, and the hint was lost. "I am rather surprised," said she, "that Mr. Crawford should come back again so soon, after being here so long, being full 7 weeks, for I had understood he was so very fond of change and moving about, that I thought something would certainly occur when he was once gone to take him elsewhere. He is used to much gayer places than Mansfield." "It is to his credit," was Edmund's answer, "and I dare say it gives his sister pleasure. She does not like his unsettled habits. What a favorite he is with my cousins! Yes, his manners to women are such as must please. Mrs. Grant, I believe, suspects him of a preference for Julia. I have never seen much symptom of it, but I wish it may be so. He has no faults but what a serious attachment would remove." "If Miss Bertram were not engaged," said Fanny cautiously, "I could sometimes almost think that he admired her more than Julia." "Which is perhaps more in favor of his liking Julia best than you, Fanny, may be aware, for I believe it often happens that a man, before he's quite made up his own mind, will distinguish the sister or intimate friend of the woman he is really thinking of more than the woman herself. Crawford has too much sense to stay here if he found himself in any danger from Maria, and I am not at all afraid for her, after such a proof as she has given that her feelings are not strong." Fanny supposed she must have been mistaken, and meant to think differently in the future. But with all that submission to Edmund could do, and all the help of the coinciding looks and hints which he occasionally noticed in some of the others, and which seemed to say that Julia was Mr. Crawford's choice, she knew not always what to think. She was privy one evening to the hopes of her Aunt Norris on the subject, as well as to her feelings, and the feelings of Mrs. Rushworth on a point of some similarity, and could not help wondering as she listened, and glad would she have been not to be obliged to listen, for it was a while all the other young people were dancing, and she sitting most unwillingly among the chaperons at the fire, longing for the re-entrance of her elder cousin, on whom all her own hopes of a partner then depended. It was Fanny's first ball, though without the preparation or splendor of many a young lady's first ball, being the thought only of the afternoon, built on the late acquisition of a violin-player in the servants' hall, and the possibility of raising 5 couples with the help of Mrs. Grant, and a new intimate friend of Mr. Bertram's just arrived on a visit. It had, however, been a very happy one to Fanny through 4 dances, and she was quite grieved to be losing even a quarter of an hour. While waiting and wishing, looking now at the dancers and now at the door, this dialogue between the 2 above-mentioned ladies was forced on her. "I think, ma'am," said Mrs. Norris, her eyes directed towards Mr. Rushworth and Maria, who were partners for the second time. "We shall see some happy faces again now." "Yes, ma'am, indeed," replied the other with a stately simper. "There will be some satisfaction in looking on now, and I think it was rather a pity that should have been obliged to part. Young folks in their situation should be excused complying with the common forms. I wonder my son did not propose it." "I dare say he did, ma'am. Mr. Rushworth is never remiss, but dear Maria has such a strict sense of propriety, so much of that true delicacy when one seldom meets with nowadays. Mrs. Rushworth, that wish of avoiding particularity. Dear ma'am, only look at her face at this moment. How different from what it was those last two dances." Miss Bertram did indeed look happy. Her eyes were sparkling with pleasure, and she was speaking with great animation. For Julia and her partner, Mr. Crawford, were close to her. They were all in a cluster together. How she had looked before, Fanny could not recollect, for she had been dancing with Edmund herself, and had not thought about her. Mrs. Norris continued, "It is quite delightful, ma'am, to see young people so properly happy, so well suited, and so much the thing. I cannot but think of dear Sir Thomas Delight. And what do you say, ma'am, to the chance of another match? Mr. Rushworth has set a good example, and such things are very catching." Mrs. Rushworth, who saw nothing but her son, was quite at a loss. "The couple above, ma'am. Do you see no symptoms there?" "Oh dear, Miss Julia and Mr. Crawford. Yes, indeed, a very pretty match. What is his property?" "4,000 a year." "Very well. Those who have not more must be satisfied with what they have. 4,000 a year is a pretty estate, and he seems a very genteel, steady young man. So I hope Miss Julia will be very happy." "It is not a settled thing, ma'am, yet. We only speak of it among friends, but I have very little doubt it will be. He is growing extremely particular in his attentions." Fanny could listen no farther. Listening and wondering were all suspended for a time, for Mr. Bertram was in the room again, and though feeling it would be a great honor to be asked by him, she thought it must happen. He came towards their little circle, but instead of asking her to dance, drew a chair near her, and gave her an account of the present state of a sick horse, and the opinion of the groom from whom he had just parted. Fanny found that it was not to be, and in the modesty of her nature immediately felt that she had been unreasonable in expecting it. When he had told of his horse, he took a newspaper from the table, and looking over it, said in a languid way, "If you want to dance, Fanny, I will stand up with you." With more than equal civility, the offer was declined. She did not wish to dance. "I'm glad of it," said he, in a much brisker tone, and throwing down the newspaper again, "for I'm tired to death. I only wonder how the good people can keep it up so long. They need be all in love to find any amusement in such a folly, and so they are, I fancy. If you look at them, you may see there are so many couples of lovers, all but Yates and Mrs. Grant, and between ourselves, she, poor woman, must want a lover as much as any one of them. A desperate, dull life hers must be with a doctor," making a sly face as he spoke towards the chair of the latter, who, proving, however, to be close at his elbow, made so instantaneous a change of expression and subject necessary as Fanny, in spite of everything, could hardly help laughing at. "A strange business this in America, Dr. Grant. What is your opinion? I always come to you to know what I am to think of public matters." "My dear Tom," cried his aunt soon afterwards, "as you are not dancing, I dare say you will have no objection to join us in a rubber ball, shall you?" Then leaving her seat, and coming to him to enforce the proposal, added in a whisper, "We want to make a table for Mrs. Rushworth, you know. Your mother is quite anxious about it, but cannot very well spare time to sit down herself because of fringe. Now, you and I and Dr. Grant will just do, and though we play but half crowns, you know, you may be half guineas with him." "I should be most happy," replied he aloud, and jumped up with alacrity. "It would give me the greatest pleasure, but that I am this moment going to dance. Come, Fanny," taking her hand, "do not be dawdling any longer, or the dance will be over." Fanny was led off very willingly, though it was impossible for her to feel much gratitude toward her cousin, or distinguish, as he certainly did, between the selfishness of another person and his own. "A pretty modest request, upon my word," he indignantly exclaimed as they walked away, "to want to nail me to a card table for the next 2 hours with herself and Dr. Grant, who are always quarreling, and that poking old woman who knows no more whist than of algebra. I wish my good aunt would be a little less busy. And to ask me in such a way, too, without ceremony, before them all, so as to leave me no possibility of refusing. That is what I dislike most particularly. It raises my spleen more than anything to have the pretense of being asked, of being given a choice, and at the same time addressed in such a way as to oblige one to do the very thing, whatever it may be. If I had not luckily thought of standing up with you, I could not have got out of it. It is a great deal too bad. But when my aunt has got a fancy in her head, nothing can stop her. Chapter 13. The Honorable John Yates, this new friend, had not much to recommend him beyond habits of fashion and expense, and being the younger son of a lord with a tolerable independence, and Sir Thomas would probably have thought his introduction at Mansfield by no means desirable, Mr. Bertram's acquaintance with him had begun at Weymouth, where they had spent 10 days together in the same society, and the friendship, if friendship it might be called, had been proved and perfected by Mr. Yates being invited to take Mansfield in his way whenever he could, and by his promising to come, and he did come rather earlier than had been expected, in consequence of the sudden breaking up of a large party assembled for gaiety at the house of another friend, which he had left Weymouth to join. He came on the wings of disappointment, and with his head full of acting, for it had been a theatrical party, and the play in which he had borne a part was within 2 days of representation, when the sudden death of one of the nearest connections of the family had destroyed the scheme and dispersed the performers. To be so near happiness, so near fame, so near the long paragraph in praise of the private theatricals at Ecclesford, the seat of the Right Honourable Lord Ravenshaw in Cornwall, which would, of course, have immortalized the whole party for at least a 12-month, and being so near to lose it all, was an injury to be keenly felt, and Mr. Yates could talk of nothing else. Ecclesford and its theatre, with its arrangements and dresses, rehearsals and jokes, was his never-failing subject, and to boast of the past his only consolation. Happily for him, a love of the theatre is so general, an itch for acting so strong among young people, that he could hardly out-talk the interest of his hearers. From the first casting of the parts to the epilogue, it was all bewitching, and there were few who did not wish to have been party concerned, or would have hesitated to try their skill. The play had been Lovers' Vows, and Mr. Yates was to have been Count Cassel. A trifling part, said he, and not at all to my taste, and such a one as I certainly would not accept again. But I was determined to make no difficulties. Lord Ravenclaw and the Duke had appropriated the only 2 characters worth playing before I reached Ecclesford, and though Lord Ravenshaw offered to resign his to me, it was impossible to take it, you know. I was sorry for him that he should have so mistaken his powers, for he was no more equal to the Baron, a little man with a weak voice, always hoarse after the first 10 minutes. It must have been injurious to the prince materially, but I was resolved to make no difficulties. Sir Henry thought the Duke not equal to Frederick, but that was because Sir Henry wanted the part himself, whereas it was certainly in the best hands of the 2. I was surprised to see Sir Henry such a stick. Luckily, the strength of the piece did not depend on him. Our Agatha was inimitable, and the Duke was thought very great by many, and upon the whole it would certainly have gone off wonderfully. It was a hard case, upon my word, and I do think you were very much to be pitied, were the kind responses of listening sympathy. It is not worth complaining about, but to be sure the poor old dowager could not have died at a worse time, and it is impossible to help wishing that the news could have been suppressed for just the 3 days we wanted. It was but 3 days, and being only a grandmother and all happening 200 miles off, I think there would have been no great harm. And it was suggested, I know, but Lord Ravenclaw, who I suppose is one of the most correct men in England, would not hear of it. An afterpiece instead of a comedy, said Mr. Bertram. Lovers' Vows were at an end, and Lord and Lady Ravenshaw left to act my grandmother to themselves. Well, the joint venture may comfort him. And perhaps between friends he began to tremble for his credit and his lungs in the Baron, and was not sorry to withdraw, and to make you amends. Yates, I think we must raise a little theatre at Mansfield and ask you to be our manager. This, though the thought of the moment, did not end with the moment, for the inclination to act was awakened, and in no one more strongly than in him who was now master of the house, and who, having so much leisure as to make almost any novelty a certain good, had likewise such a degree of lively talents and comic taste as were exactly adapted to the novelty of acting. The thought returned again and again. Oh, for the Ecclesford Theatre and scenery to try something with. Each sister could echo the wish, and Henry Crawford, to whom in all the riot of his gratifications it was yet in untasted pleasure, was quite alive at the idea. I really believe, said he, I could be fool enough at this moment to undertake any character that ever was written, from Shylock or Richard III down to the singing hero of a farce in his scarlet coat and cocked hat. I feel as if I could be anything or everything, as if I could rant and storm or sigh and cut capers in any tragedy or comedy in the English language. Let us be doing something, be it only half a play, an act, a scene. What should prevent us? Not these countenances, I'm sure. Looking towards the Miss Bertrams. And for a theatre, what signifies a theatre? We shall be only amusing ourselves. Any room in this house might suffice. We must have a curtain, said Tom Bertram. A few yards of green baize for a curtain, and perhaps that may be enough. Oh, quite enough, cried Mr. Yates. With only just a side wing or two run up, doors in flat, and 3 or 4 scenes to be let down, nothing more would be necessary on such a plan as this. For mere amusement among ourselves, we would want nothing more. I believe we must be satisfied with less, said Maria. There would not be time, and other difficulties would arise. We must rather adopt Mr. Crawford's views, and make the performance, not the theatre, our object. Many parts of our best plays are independent of scenery. Nay, said Edmund, who began to listen with alarm, let us do nothing by halves. If we are to act, let it be in a theatre completely fitted up with pit, boxes, and gallery, and let us have a play entire from beginning to end, so as it be a German play, no matter what, with a good tricking, shifting afterpiece, and a figure dance, and a hornpipe, and a song between the acts. If we do not outdo Ecclesford, we do nothing. Now, Edmund, do not be disagreeable, said Julia. Nobody loves a play better than you do, or can have gone much farther to see one. True, to see real acting, good, hardened, real acting, but I would hardly walk from this room to the next to look at the raw efforts of those who have not been bred to the trade, a set of gentlemen and ladies who have all the disadvantages of education and decorum to struggle through. After a short pause, however, the subject still continued, and was discussed with unabated eagerness, everyone's inclination increasing by the discussion, and a knowledge of the inclination of the rest. And though nothing was settled but that Tom Bertram would prefer a comedy, and his sisters and Henry Crawford a tragedy, and that nothing in the world could be easier than to find a piece which would please them all, the resolution to act something or other seemed so decided as to make Edmund quite uncomfortable. He was determined to prevent it, if possible, though his mother, who equally heard the conversation which passed at table, did not evince the least disapprobation. The same evening afforded him an opportunity of trying his strength. Maria, Julia, Henry Crawford, and Mr. Yates were in the billiard-room, Tom returning from them into the drawing-room, where Edmund was standing thoughtfully by the fire, while Lady Bertram was on the sofa at a little distance, and Fanny close beside her arranging her work. Thus began as he entered. Such a horribly vile billiard table as ours is not to be met with. I believe above ground I can stand it no longer, and I think I may say that nothing shall ever tempt me to it again, but one good thing I have just ascertained. It is the very room for a theatre, precisely the shape and length for it, and the doors at the farther end, communicating with each other, as they may be made to do in 5 minutes, by merely moving the bookcase in my father's room, is the very thing we could have desired, if we had sat down to wish for it, and my father's room will be an excellent green room. It seems to join the billiard room on purpose. You're not serious, Tom, in meaning to act? Said Edmund in a low voice as his brother approached the fire. Not serious. Never more so, I assure you. What is there to surprise you in it? I think it would be very wrong. In a general light, private theatricals are open to some objections, but as we are circumstanced, I must think it would be highly injudicious, and more than injudicious, to attempt anything of the kind. It would show great want of feeling on my father's account, absent as he is, and in some degree of constant danger, and it would be imprudent, I think, with regard to Maria, whose situation is a very delicate one, considering everything, extremely delicate. You take up a thing so seriously, as if we were going to act 3 times a week till my father's return, and invite all the country. But it is not to be a display of that sort. We mean nothing but a little amusement among ourselves, just to vary the scene and exercise our powers in something new. We want no audience, no publicity. We may be trusted, I think, in choosing some play most perfectly unexceptionable, and I can conceive no greater harm or danger to any of us in conversing in the elegant written language of some respectable author than in chattering in words of our own. I have no fears and no scruples, and as to my father's being absent, it is so far from an objection that I consider it rather as a motive, for the expectation of his return must be a very anxious period to my mother, and if we can be the means of amusing that anxiety and keeping up her spirits for the next few weeks, I shall think our time very well spent, and so, I'm sure, will he. It is a very anxious period for her. As he said this, each looked towards their mother. Lady Bertram, sunk back in one corner of the sofa, the picture of health, wealth, ease, and tranquillity, was just falling into a gentle doze, while Fanny was getting through the few difficulties of her work for her. Edmund smiled and shook his head. By Jove, this won't do, cried Tom, throwing himself into a chair with a heavy laugh. To be sure, my dear mother, your anxiety. I was unlucky there. What is the matter? Asked her ladyship, in the heavy tone of one half roused. I was not asleep. Oh, dear, no, ma'am. Nobody suspected you. Well, Edmund, he continued, returning to the former subject, posture, and voice, as soon as Lady Bertram began to nod again. But this I will maintain, that we shall be doing no harm. I cannot agree with you. I am convinced that my father would totally disapprove it, and I am convinced of the contrary. Nobody is fonder of the exercise of talent in young people, or promotes it more than my father, and for anything of the acting, spouting, reciting kind, I think he has always a decided taste. I am sure he encouraged it in us as boys. How many a time have we mourned over the dead body of Julius Caesar, and to bead and not to bead, in this very room for his amusement? And I am sure my name was Norval every evening of my life through one Christmas holiday. It was a very different thing. You must see the difference yourself. My father wished us as schoolboys to speak well, but he would never wish his grown-up daughters to be acting plays. His sense of decorum is strict. I know all that, said Tom, displeased. I know my father as well as you do, and I'll take care that his daughters do nothing to distress him. Manage your own concerns, Edmund, and I'll take care of the rest of the family. If you are resolved on acting, replied the persevering Edmund, I must hope it will be in a very small and quiet way, and I think a theatre ought not to be attempted. It would be taking liberties with my father's house in his absence, which could not be justified. For everything of that nature I will be answerable, said Tom in a decided tone. "His house shall not be hurt. I have quite as great an interest in being careful of his house as you can have, and as to such alterations as I was suggesting just now, such as moving a bookcase or unlocking a door, or even as using the billiard room for the space of a week without playing at billiards in it, you might just as well suppose he would object to our sitting more in this room, and less in the breakfast room, than we did before he went away, or to my sister's pianoforte being moved from one side of the room to the other. Absolute nonsense. The innovation, if not wrong as an innovation, will be wrong as an expense. Yes, the expense of such an undertaking would be prodigious. Perhaps it might cost a whole £20. Something of a theatre we must have undoubtedly, but it will be on the simplest plan. A green curtain and a little carpenter's work, and that's all. And as the carpenter's work may be all done at home by Christopher Jackson himself, it will be too absurd to talk of expense. And as long as Jackson is employed, everything will be right with Sir Thomas. Don't imagine that nobody in this house can see or judge but yourself. Don't act yourself if you don't like it, but don't expect to govern everybody else. No, as to acting myself, said Edmund, that I absolutely protest against. Tom walked out of the room as he said it, and Edmund was left to sit down and stir the fire in thoughtful vexation. Fanny, who had heard it all and borne Edmund company in every feeling throughout the whole, now ventured to say, in her anxiety to suggest some comfort, "Perhaps they may not be able to find any play to suit them. Your brother's taste and your sister's seem very different." "I have no hope there, Fanny. If they persist in the scheme, they will find something. I shall speak to my sisters and try to dissuade them, and that is all I can do." "I should think my Aunt Norris would be on your side." "I dare say she would, but she has no influence with either Tom or my sisters that could be of any use, and if I cannot convince them myself, I shall let things take their course, without attempting it through her. Family squabbling is the greatest evil of all, and we had better do anything than be altogether by the ears." His sisters, to whom he had an opportunity of speaking the next morning, were quite as impatient of his advice, quite as unyielding to his representation, quite as determined in the cause of pleasure as Tom. Their mother had no objection to the plan, and they were not in the least afraid of their father's disapprobation. There could be no harm in what had been done in so many respectable families, and by so many women of the first consideration, and it must be scrupulousness run mad that could see anything to censure in a plan like theirs, comprehending only brothers and sisters and intimate friends, and which would never be heard of beyond themselves. Julia did seem inclined to admit that Maria's situation might require particular caution and delicacy, but that could not extend to her. She was at liberty, and Maria evidently considered her engagement as only raising her so much more above restraint, and leaving her less occasion than Julia to consult either father or mother. Edmund had little hope, but he was still urging the subject when Henry Crawford entered the room, fresh from the parsonage, calling out, "No want of hands in our theatre, Miss Bertram, no want of understrappers. My sister desires her love, and hopes to be admitted into the company, and will be happy to take the part of any old duenna or tame confidante that you may not like to do yourselves." Maria gave Edmund a glance which meant, "What say you now? Can we be wrong if Mary Crawford feels the same?" And Edmund, silenced, was obliged to ascertain that the charm of acting might well carry fascination to the mind of genius, and with the ingenuity of love to dwell more on the obliging, accommodating purport of the message than on anything else. The scheme advanced. Opposition was vain, and as to Mrs. Norris, he was mistaken in supposing she would wish to make any. She started no difficulties that were not talked down in 5 minutes by her eldest nephew and niece, who were all powerful with her, and as the whole arrangement was to bring very little expense to anybody, and none at all to herself, as she foresaw in it all the comforts of a hurry, bustle, and importance, and derived the immediate advantage of fancying herself obliged to leave her own house, where she had been living a month at her own cost, and take up her abode in theirs, that every hour might be spent in their service, she was, in fact, exceedingly delighted with the project.